Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Design Review Board and Cultural Heritage Board on October 2nd. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item of business is a roll call. Patty?
Let the record reflect that for Cultural Heritage Board, all board members are present except for Chair Edmondson and Board Member Muser. And on Design Review Board, all board members are present except for Vice Chair Hedgepeth and Board Member Cordenbrock.
Thank you, Patty. Next item of business is approval of the minutes, and I didn't have any attached minutes to my document. Do we have any joint minutes to?
There are no minutes.
There weren't any minutes, okay. Thank you, Bill. Moving on to board business, this is where we identify each board's purpose for the city. So for the Design Review Board, the purpose is project review. The review authority shall consider the location, design, site plan configuration, and the overall effect of the proposed project upon surrounding properties and in the city in general. Review shall be conducted by comparing the proposed project to the general plan, any applicable specific plan, applicable zoning code standards and requirements, consistency of the project within the city's design review guidelines, architectural criteria for special areas, and any other applicable city requirements, i.e. city policy statements and development plans. The Cultural Heritage Board has its own statement of purpose, and I'll hand it over to Mark to read that.
Thank you. I apologize for not being particularly prepared today for the chair. I am looking for the purpose in our agenda. Bill, would you care to?
Yeah, so Board Member DeBacher, I'd be happy. It looks like it's not on the agenda, but I can read it into the record if you'd like.
Thank you, sir.
So this is essentially, this is the purview of the Cultural Heritage Board. The Cultural Heritage Board shall consider the following matters, standards, guidelines, and criteria to the extent applicable in determining whether to grant or deny a permit, whether the proposed change is consistent or incompatible with the architectural period of the building, whether the proposed change is compatible with any adjacent or nearby landmark structures or preservation district structures, whether the colors, textures, materials, fenestration, decorative features, and details proposed are consistent with the period and or are compatible with adjacent structures, whether the proposed change destroys or adversely affects an important architectural feature or features, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation and guidelines for rehabilitating historic buildings, such other matters, criteria, and standards as may be adopted by resolution of the Cultural Heritage Board.
Thank you, Bill. At this time, I would like to welcome the public again and open the meeting for public comment. This would be public comment for items that are not on today's agenda, but are relevant to either the Design Review Board or the Cultural Heritage Board. Any members of the public wishing to speak? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Next item is statements of abstention by board members. Any board members need to abstain? Seeing none, we will move on to scheduled items. So there has been a change this evening. Scheduled item number 6.1, concept design review for Caritas Village, has been pulled from the agenda and will be heard at another time. So we will move on to item 6.2. Concept design review, landmark alteration for 528 B Street redevelopment at 528 B Street, file number LMA 19-016. And Andrew Triple with staff will be giving us a presentation, as will the applicant.
Great, good afternoon, Chair Kincaid and members of the Cultural Heritage Board and Design Review Board. The project before you today for joint concept review is redevelopment of the property at 528 B Street. Concept review by the Cultural Heritage Board is required for this project, and design review by the Design Review Board is at the option of the applicants. The applicant has chosen to have input from the Design Review Board as well, so we're holding the joint meeting today. So project description, major design review with preliminary design review approval by both the DRB and Cultural Heritage Board is required for the proposed project exceeding 5,000 square feet within a historic combining district. The applicant project that they'll be discussing today is construction of a new 5-story, 36,650 square foot, 24-unit mixed-use building in the St. Rose Preservation District. Additionally, a major landmark alteration permit reviewed and subject to approval by the Cultural Heritage Board is required for this project for both demolition of the existing building as well as approval of a building height in excess of 35 feet and 2 stories within a historic combining district. The proposed building height of the new structure is approximately 57 feet 6 inches. So the project location is in downtown Santa Rosa in the northeast quadrant. And it's located there at the elbow of Healdsburg Avenue, where it becomes B Street, adjacent to City of Santa Rosa parking structure, which will be important as the applicant will explain with regard to their parking plan. The project is located within retail and business services land use designation, and the retail business services land use designation pursuant to land use and livability policy LUL-E-6 does allow multifamily development within this land use, as well as the office development, which would be the ground floor use for this mixed use structure. And as we see, it is across the street from medium high density residential land use there on the west side of B Street. However, it is within the retail and business services land use designations entirely to the east side of B Street and Healdsburg Avenue. On this slide as well, I'll go ahead and point out that the zoning is downtown commercial, 5-story height in a station area plan. This project is subject to the downtown station area specific plan, as well as the historic combining district additional regulations contained in the zoning code. In this image here, I overlaid the St. Rose Preservation District so you could see the location of the proposed project within the St. Rose Preservation District, located there at the edge of the Preservation District. And then additionally, this image identifies the those structures or properties that are contributors to the establishment of the St. Rose Preservation District. So the subject property is not a contributor to the establishment of the district. At the time of the most recent survey, the building was less than 45 years old, and so it would not have been considered potentially a historic resource. However, since that time, the building is now over 45 years old, and so a historic resource study will be required should an application be submitted. And I'm available to answer any questions you might have. The applicant has a detailed presentation that addresses both site development and design considerations for the proposed project.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll start with questions for staff, and we'll start with the Design Review Board. So Adam, do you have any questions for staff?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Henry, questions for staff?
No questions.
Drew, questions for staff?
Yeah, so with this property has to have its landmark alteration permit done, but it would potentially be fast-tracked because it's residential and it's in the station area plan combining district, correct?
Well, so that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. The project, due to its location within the downtown station area plan, is within a priority development area. And so the city resilient measures, or the resilient city measures, would apply except that it is in a historic district. So the resilient city measures state that if a project is located within a historic district, then it is subject to design review pursuant to the historic combining district ordinance.
So we would see this project for preliminary and final at some point for a major design review as opposed to having the
right. You would see it for preliminary. However, the resilient city measures do delegate all final review to planning staff.
So this would get delegated as so it would. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. That's my question.
But certainly you would have the option, you could have the option of approving final design review at the time that the preliminary design review is reviewed.
Thanks.
And also I should note that a neighborhood meeting was held on January 30th for this project and was well attended.
Good question, Drew, and thank you, Andrew. Eric, any questions? Moving over to Cultural Heritage Board, Laura, any questions for staff? John, any questions for staff? And Kurt, no? And Mark?
I have one. I'd like staff, can you confirm the period of significance for the St. Rose District and the year of construction on the existing structure? I found from one source, but I normally check more than one source in our guidelines. I don't have time to check the second at the moment. I have 1872 to 1948 on the source that I checked, and I wanted to verify if that's on the official numbers for that.
I can check on that and get back with you.
Okay, do we have the year of the construction of the existing site, of the existing structure?
It was constructed in 1969.
That's consistent with its appearance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions for staff? And I have no questions for staff. So at this time, I'd like the applicant to make a presentation. Once you approach the microphone, if you could, for the record, give us your name and your relationship to the project, that would be great. And if you could also remember to speak into the microphone. We've had some visual issues with the televised streaming, so thank you.
Can you hear me? Good? Okay. My name is Tom Karsten. I'm the applicant, and we also own the property, and if you'll permit me, I'll have presented. I've prepared a brief introduction. I'd like to share with you all a little historical background on the property and the like. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Karsten, and along with my development partners at Archeologic, we are the applicant on the project before you. To the respective board chairs and members of the Cultural Heritage and Design Review Boards, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our project and receive your comments. Having served on the DRB and Planning Commission in an earlier life, I am well familiar with the time commitment associated with these important volunteer positions and appreciate your willingness to serve in that capacity. Before I turn our presentation over to Mitch Connor, our design architect, and Christine Talbot, our landscape architect, I thought it might help if I could provide some background. The current building on the subject site was built in 1969 to serve as a podiatry clinic and surgery center until my firm purchased the property in 1995, and we've occupied it ever since. Prior to purchasing this property, we were tenants in the two-story office building immediately adjacent to the subject property to the north for 4 years. That would be, does this work? It would be this property right here, just immediately adjacent. So we have been a resident and property owner in the neighborhood for over 28 years, and as such have been privy to the changes that have taken place over that time. Back in November 2005, we proposed a redevelopment plan of the site to build a 4-story, 22,000 square foot office building on the site that was jointly approved by the DRB and Cultural Heritage Boards. However, due to a combination of never-ending increase in construction cost, a softening local office rental market, and then the sustained hit of a global recession, we tabled the project as it was no longer economically viable. Then in early 2017 and prior to the October fires, we envisioned redeveloping the site with a mixed-use building comprised of ground floor commercial office space that will serve as new offices for my firm and that of my development partner, Archeologics, with the upper 4 floors comprised of studio, 1- and 2-bedroom apartment units, allowing for 6 units per floor for a total of 24 residential rental units. All units will have outdoor balconies. In doing so, this project complies with the city objectives to build high-density housing appropriate for a city center pedestrian-friendly environment. However, the site offers some interesting and rather complex issues to overcome. The first is the site is only 60 feet wide by 140 feet deep. This narrowness of the site represents some significant design challenges to efficiently provide residential units while also being respectful of neighboring buildings and uses. This is compounded by the fact that the office buildings to the north of our building sit directly on the property line, and the apartment building to the south is a mere 4 feet off the property line. As such, this leaves us with little flexibility in providing floor plates large enough to build appropriate-sized apartment units necessary to attract tenants, making the economic feasibility of our project all the more challenging. Would you go to slide 2, thank you. However, that is not the only challenging aspect we are faced with. Per the slide that you're looking at, the red box represents our site, and you will note it is situated on the southeastern edge of the St. Rose Historic Preservation District that is highlighted in green. The site is also part of the downtown station area specific plan, Courthouse Square sub-area, highlighted in orange. Therefore, our site is governed by overlapping district designations, and these plans have their own set of growth, redevelopment objectives, and multiple design constraints that unfortunately are not entirely consistent with one another. To break it down further, the purple dotted line denotes an entryway street type that has its own set of guidelines. And since this street traffic designation was created, B Street traffic flow patterns were altered to accommodate changes brought forth with the reunification of Courthouse Square, making B Street a more heavily trafficked thoroughfare that funnels traffic through and around downtown and to freeway on-ramps. I mention this to point out that this action did much to alter the nature of all properties on B Street that sit between College Avenue to the north and 7th Street to the south. The significance of these changes is that it is unlikely this edge of the historic district can be turned back to what it was envisioned 30 years ago when the district guidelines were created, unless there are significant changes to how traffic flow is directed on B Street. Then there is the proximity of the 7th Street garage to the east of our site. While the garage is not a contributor as a historic structure, because of location, immense size, and how tall it is, it cannot be ignored, as it is in every way a contributor to what is going on all around us. And because of its location, it serves as a vital component of our project, for it allows us to not have to add parking on the site. With that in mind, and given how we've designed the project, we feel we are actively engaging the parking lot by enhancing its accessibility and usage. We point this out to demonstrate there's a lot going on in and around the subject site, with each plan having different objectives related to this location that don't always mesh in context and intent. That, coupled with designing a project that can reasonably address both DBR and CHB guidelines that, with respect to our site, are also in conflict, have made this a very challenging exercise. Simply put, the complexity of the site having to serve so many different masters make for a challenging project to design and make work. I will now turn the presentation over to our design team, who will address issues associated with the design and architecture. Once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Mitch Connor, principal with Archeologics, and development partner with Tom and his colleagues. What I'd like to do is pick up on the last item topic that Tom was referring to, which is the streets. And certainly, you know, any good design problem has, as Tom points out, sometimes several masters that we have to pay attention to. And so I think once we realized that the street, in particular the gateway street type, I think it enabled us and sort of freed up our thinking to look at a more intense or robust development and architectural solution that was appropriate for this edge of the historical district. So, oh, sorry. So just as a matter of definition, the dashed line, the purple line, the entry street type, it exists for along key corridors in locations that bring travelers to the specific plan area, in this case from the north to the south and vice versa. The goal of the entry street type is to mediate between the small scale residential development and the larger scale development. So I think once we, and this actually came from the comment that Tom made earlier about his sort of watching the street change over the years, that we sort of married up the idea that, you know, the streets really define the, you know, the experience of the district. From an urban planning point of view, it's really the sort of underlying idea that, you know, enables our architectural response to have meaning and value and purpose. So this really, I believe, helped us, you know, sort of justify the kind of architectural response that we're going to look at. So one of the things that we did in order to understand the street is moving from north to south. We sort of did a kind of an MRI on that section of street to really understand, you know, what role previous buildings have played in defining this sort of gateway experience. So what we did is we got 4 sort of sections through here. This one is, you know, the Moore Building, Healdsburg Avenue and 10th Street. So you can see the sort of the section and the relationship of the public realm to existing buildings. As we move further south, there's the Brew, or I think that's what it's called, the restaurant and pub, and the open space that the city owns adjacent to the parking structure. So at this point, the aperture of the street really opens up. And you know, our experience with this idea of bringing buildings to the back of sidewalks, you know, and understanding the impact of that, a lot of times has to do with, you know, creating a kind of a canyon effect, which can be a you know, sort of a negative experience. For me personally, as a resident of the town green in Windsor, we have a lot of that, and it can be quite pleasant, and it's actually a feature of that environment. So we weren't necessarily intimidated by bringing the building to the street, but we also needed to sort of justify and understand, you know, how it was going to be perceived as you moved on this street. So the next section, which really is our buildings to the left in the crosshatch section, then you see these large front yards that are in front of the Victorians there. So it really opens up, and you know, there's no, in our opinion, no difficulty or challenge here as far as unnecessary shading or sort of a scale of development that would intimidate, you know, the pedestrian. In fact, if anything, it starts to get and create, I think, a stronger edge on the east side. Sorry. And then the final one is down as you get into these apartment buildings, which actually do what we're talking about, you know, which we think is a good thing, which is they are coming to the sidewalk, you know, and allowing not just the mass, but the, you know, the detail of those buildings be experienced differently for the pedestrian in a positive way. And just as a kind of a reflection point, and for some of you that remember the RUDAT back in '98, you know, that national team spoke specifically to this collector street doing exactly what it's doing now. And in fact, talked about bringing liner buildings in front of the mall to even reinforce that experience even more. So hopefully as we continue to, you know, redevelop and repurpose our downtown with some of these planning, you know, goals that are about to be revised and put in place, you know, remember that we have a lot of history with this particular street, you know, being a collector and being kind of a launching point as you know, experience these different districts. So before I turn this over to Christine, she can talk about the landscaping. The development guidelines for construction of infill development, these are the sort of 3 things that we really want to talk about, you know, here with you this afternoon. First of all, this is a contemporary building. There's no, you know, we're not trying to camouflage it in some kind of, you know, historical, architectural type. We certainly respect older buildings, obviously, and what they bring to our, to development in general and the history of Santa Rosa, but we think in an interpretive way, we've come forth with sort of a rendition of a building that, tries to, make a gesture to, our history. Christine will talk about the landscaping, and then I will come back and talk about the details of the building and how, as it comes out of the ground, what it starts to do. So these are important elements that we'll focus on.
Good evening. I'm Christine Talbot from Quadriga Landscape Architecture, and just speaking a little bit about the presence of the building and the landscape and how one explores the street and comes into the building. I really want to point to things. Does this show up? No. Okay. So the public sidewalk is a very important component of, electrifying the street and creating more of a pedestrian experience. And we do have the B Street connection, but we also have the connection to the public sidewalk on the eastern side, which is adjacent to the public garage. So we have the opportunity to create a little bit of a paseo along our property to create some movement in and out of the site and to allow for a more pedestrian-oriented development. Much of our landscaping will probably be low to allow visibility into the building and to provide the low impact development requirements that we have for stormwater. And especially at the street, we're gonna have a lot of variety in the planting material to make it engaging and to allow a view out of the building, the windows along the sidewalk so that there's some transparency in and out. Mitch will talk about the circulation within the building, but we also have this paseo where we envision a transparent opening here. There'll be a gate, so it'll be open during business hours, but they'll have the ability to close it off for security reasons so that residents can have some security in the evening. We will have a screening fence along the north property line that will be decorative and have vines to provide some privacy to the neighbors to the north because they have therapeutic business that they have, so they would like to have some privacy, and also the building tenants would like to have a little privacy. We envision this area as being very rich in material. It's a small space, but it'll be highly detailed with interesting pavement, the interest in the fencing, and also we'll have some more columnar trees interrupting the space and providing a little separation between the properties. As we move through the paseo, there'll be entries into the downstairs space, which would be envisioned as office space and could be used as breakout space during the day for employees to have lunch or meet. And then also a gate into the more residential portion of the building where residents would access their home. Along the southern side of the property, there's access in and out. This is exit-only doors for emergency exits and also just daily use. And this component will also be detailed with interesting materials and overhead components to provide interest at the street level and the same level of detailing with the pavement and the planting. I'm going to show some of the elements that we're looking at right now to kind of keep that transparency. Right now we're looking at ways to have visibility in the site and still provide privacy, so we're playing with different materials, metal and glass, woven metal fencing, and or a mesh component. So these are the materials that we're looking at right now. We look for opportunities to grow vines on the building to bring some of that greening and up the vertical. And again, interesting pavement patterns so that there's, it's like a little jewel box paseo with a lot of interest. And then columnar plantings. To Mitch.
So the ground floor, the first floor, the idea on the B Street side, like Christine alluded to, and again, we haven't space planned this suite. I mean, it's Tom's office and ours, but some of the things that we've all kind of committed to, and I think this is a real positive, is that the public experience as you're going down B Street, I'm a real big believer in sort of transparent edges in the buildings. I think people like to see activity, and if they don't see activity, they like to see some kind of an illuminated building in the evenings. So this would be, you know, like a lobby for our two offices. It would be kind of a meeting combination, really creative, maybe even a gallery type space. So the idea is that, you know, when we shut it down at night, assuming that ever happens in an architectural office, that, you know, there will be things that we can display and, you know, possibly tie into an art program with the city. I'll show you in a second the kind of window systems, but they are steel sash. They're quite large on both this edge and the street edge. We think it's important that, you know, that the material and the windows be interesting just in and of themselves. So I'll show you what we have in mind there. The thing about the Paseo, like Christine said, you know, it is a breakout space. It's meant to be active. And yet at the same time, out of respect to the people who will be renting, you know, this sort of lobby for the residents, there is sort of a, you know, not back of house, but a more secured way of getting into the building. And the same for our staff. So if people are working here at night, you know, and they do decide to go home at some point, and they don't want to go back into the garage this way, they want to go down the street, and then, you know, that there's a series of checkpoints that they can kind of take stock of what's going on around them as they move out, you know, into the public areas. So floors 2 through 5, as Tom talked about, and Andrew, it's the residential component. Elevator, I'll talk about this corridor in a second. These are the 4 two-story elements that are on the street edge, and we've carved this corner off, and I'll show you the elevations and why we did that. Then we have 3 one-bedroom, 4 one-bedroom, and a studio. Vertical circulation stairwells with, you know, exits to that controlled part of the south part of the building. We thought it was important, out of respect to the apartment to our south, that even though we like windows in these corridors, you know, just to bring some light in, you know, it might be some kind of a diffused glass type window system so that, you know, people can get some kind of light that's in the corridor spilling out. They're just not looking at a big dark blank wall. And I'll show you that elevation in a second. These are the other balconies that face north. Balcony here that looks out. Unfortunately, you know, we have a big parking structure, but it does bring in light to this unit, and this one a little less so. The north elevation, the long elevation, parking structure, B Street, these are the window systems we're talking about. So what you see here is pretty much what we're going to be creating, not only along the Paseo, but also on the street side, the B Street side, which I'll show you in a minute. Building materials consist of a base, which is a split face block that moves along you know, this direction here. It also is part of the vertical circulation, both for the elevator and then when you see it on the street side, and for that matter, even from the parking structure, it becomes part of the structural statement for those particular uses of the building. We are using for the primary body of the building, so we got a base. We're using the James Hardie Reveal smooth panel system. These colors here are their standard colors, but we think what's probably gonna be in our best interest is if we bring Hardie product to the site that's primed, and we're now talking with them about, you know, field painting this, because it's just, I'm a little surprised at the limit of paint colors they have, but that's just me, I guess. So if we go to the front, street elevation, again, the steel sash windows. These are steel sash windows here. In the balcony on the corner, we have a 3D of this. Here's the vertical circulation of the stair. Christina, I think she mentioned that there's some kind of vine planting. The other thing that we're looking at is possibly bringing in some public art on that particular corner. You can see the gateway, taking you, into the Paseo. This is the elevation from the parking structure, block, and smooth panel, hardy, and the balconies for the studio and one bedroom. And then this is that south elevation. There's a number of windows, so they'll be getting a lot of light. It's not going to be bright, but it'll be enough that people in these apartments will not feel too intimidated, hopefully, by our building. And this is kind of a work in progress 3D model. It starts to give you a sense of what happens at the street, how it feels. Our neighbor that Tom talked about, where he used to have his office, the apartment building to the south, the block that comes along, goes up. Things that we're doing now are cleaning up cornices. This indentation isn't quite as deep as you see here, because we're giving back some space, to the bedroom units that are basically here, right here. What this doesn't depict that the elevation did is that the steel sash window and the structure that defines or creates that opening is, you can see it. You'll actually see these steel members that read like it's part of the actual window system. So it's not just a punched opening with a window system. That we think it's important to express the structure at this particular side of the building. And like I say, these colors, this was another attempt at trying to understand what if we lightened it up. So obviously when we get back in front of everybody, you'll see the real deal. And as far as the corner, I want to touch on this one more time. We understand primarily in the downtown plan that this notion of that after the third level, there starts to be an attempt to sort of layer the building. So part of the reason that we showed the street sections was to say, well, that's really not necessary as far as impacting the public realm. However, as a gesture to do that and to make these units more interesting, we sort of took a notch out of this corner. So we have a system of metal railing and trim pieces, and obviously another steel sash window. And these are the living rooms for those 2-bedroom units. So this is where we are right now. Obviously we're here for feedback and comments, and welcome your questions.
Thank you. Great presentation, both from a historical perspective and where we're headed in the future. So thank you. Normally a concept review, we try and keep it a little bit lighter, but because there's so many people here, I think we'll take it one by one and go with questions and comments. And we'll start with the design review board. So questions and comments, Adam. Oh. Thank you. Let's do public comment first. That's a great chair in training. Okay, so we'll open up public comment on this item. I have one card, but that doesn't mean that others cannot speak. So the one card I have is for Mr. Joe Lilienthal. We want to keep the comments to 3 minutes, and we appreciate you being here. Joe?
Thanks, Joe Lilienthal, 317 10th Street. And I just want to reinforce the overall look of the building. Just it seems too large. Normally in historic districts you have setback from the street and not a wall right at the back of the sidewalk. Even the apartment building to the south has a setback. And just as an aesthetic, if you want to compare something, a newer building that was built a few years ago, 3 properties to the south of this one, it's 514 B Street. And if you stand back and look at that, you'll notice that the design is not copying anything else. It's its own design. It's not super modern. There's some elements that were taken with tile roof and things. But if you stand back from the street and look at it, it fits into the scope of the buildings next to it. This, to me, looks really large, and it's going to blot out everything. Maybe if it was stepped back and wasn't such a prominent big wall on the street, it'd be different. But it just seems like it's too big and not quite into the historic district as far as blending in. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I have another card from Thomas Pope.
Thank you. I am part of the building to the north of this proposed building. And so I'm the building that's, we're the building that goes right up to the property line. And the concerns that we have are several. One is the construction part, and one is the basic design. This is going to dwarf our building to the north and shade our property tremendously. That Paseo also will have people right outside of our windows, and we're a psychotherapy clinic, and this is going to adversely affect our business. There is a tree you can see that's behind that. That's not a great picture of our building. That's in a courtyard, and it's going to become problematic of how we deal with that for both properties if this is built the way it is. We have a lot of concern about B Street during construction because there's no place for construction trucks to be, and it's going to block the street, and it's already a dangerous street. When they took out our parking along our side of the street there and made it a 3-lane roadway, it's a thoroughfare, and it's going to create a lot of problems with how construction materials are going to be dealt with. There's no parking, and taxis and delivery trucks will block the road also after construction. So these are some of our concerns. It's already adversely affected our property values. Realtors say that we have to disclose this is in progress, and it's going to reduce the price of our building if we try to sell it now. And afterward, it's going to also adversely affect. And it's just so big, it dwarfs us, it's going to shade us, and it's problematic building for us. I understand them wanting to build it, but it just seems too much for the property. Thank you.
Thank you as well for your comments. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing no one heading to the microphone, I will close the public comment period. And again, thank you for the reminder. Okay, back to questions and comments. Adam.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for the very thorough presentation. I did appreciate the introduction. That was great to hear that. I can definitely tell that a lot of thought has gone into this project, and you guys have been residents there, so you're invested in it. Yeah, it is a really interesting site because it does have those overlapping zones, and it's that boundary between the residential and the downtown. And it is interesting. It's a thorny issue. I mean, you guys would definitely be improving on the site and on the building that's there. That's for sure. And it's a neighborhood in transition as well, and it is having the inclusion of the more modern looking buildings into the very beautiful stately homes that are there. I think right across the street there are the larger beautiful Victorian homes. Sorry, architects, if they're not Victorian, but they look Victorian to me. And so, and I do appreciate that you haven't necessarily tried to reference that or mirror it. You're doing something new in this historic neighborhood, and I think that is definitely appropriate improvement. One of the things I've been thinking about, just in terms of the scale as well. I do appreciate bringing in the density in the housing. I wonder if some more thought can really be devoted to softening it somehow, just the scale. Thinking about the north side, you've got the 3 trees along the Paseo, the columnar trees. I wonder, I know that this is, you guys are really maximizing the site. Very narrow, very, you're putting a lot of building onto there, which I also feel is appropriate, but just thinking of ways to kind of, to really soften the edges a bit. You have those neighbors that are really close. The south side, I like the fencing and the vines, the large side of the building there, potentially even thinking of, living wall, something like that, that could really just, bring in something. I know that brings in a lot of other concerns in terms of maintenance of what's there, but just, you've got large structure, just think about softening it a little bit. Moving around to the front, I know on the southwestern corner, there's the rain garden planter. I didn't see an inclusion of a street tree on that side. Is there a reasoning behind that? This southern corner, southwestern. Okay, and they're sticklers about the microphone, so mainly for people at home.
Yeah.
The sidewalk's narrow up there.
Yeah, it's a 6-foot walk, so we haven't included a street tree at this time. If we need to include one, we can.
Okay. Yeah, that's just one thing to think about, because you're softening the northern side, but then the other side, something to think about there. I do appreciate the thought with the rain gardens going into that on the front, and I do appreciate, I liked the thought that it was going into the transparent edges of the streetscape. I thought that was a really nice idea. One of the things you don't want to have is, because if you have the softening that you are doing, is to not just have an edifice, just this huge wall. If you do have these windows, and like you say, having something engaging is really great. People walking by, there's a lot of traffic from downtown to the coffee shop right across the way. There's people working and living, and so having something that's really fun to look at when you walk by. Architecture offices, I used to say, are busy late, and it's always fun to see people working on drawings. And so, I appreciate the thought that's going into that. And then in terms of the Paseo, again, I'm looking on the street view of the site. It looks like the tree that could become problematic is something deciduous. The street view photo is in winter, so I can't tell the leaves, but it looks like it is growing over, and so that. Just wondering how it's not reflected on the plan, and how that, referencing the big tree that's there. You pulling that up? Yeah, it wasn't the street view I'm looking at. Isn't on your slide. It's actually the Google Street view, because yeah, and it is a big tree that's there, and it will be growing over, and as the neighbor mentioned, it could be problematic to figure out what is happening with that overhang. It's going to overhang the Paseo as well. And to think of ways also, you've got the Paseo with the columnar trees, and then the bump out where it's paved for 3/4 of the way, and then fully paved for the middle portion of it. And that's also happens to be the portion that is right next to where the building butts up against the property line. And so just some thought into how that division that's going to be there, and how that is going to be softened with those rooms. If they're psychotherapy practice rooms that are right there, then noise is going to be a concern as well. Thinking how you can screen for noise and for movement, being a good neighbor. Also thinking, moving towards the back of the site, the public sidewalk and the gates and security that's there. Where exactly is the access? I see it on the Google map that right towards the, I guess it would be the well, southeastern corner of the site, the access to the parking garage. And it seems like there's a stairwell directly right on the end there.
Once you come out on this sidewalk, I think there's a point about right there where you can go into the garage.
Okay.
It's south? Oh,
okay. And then a question of, I guess this might be a question for staff. I don't know if this is with you, but in terms of getting reserved spots in the parking garage, will they be reserved right next to the site, or can that happen in public parking garages?
I think the reserved spaces are available on a monthly basis, but I'm not certain how they determine where those spaces would be located.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And, you know, of course, safety, security along that walkway, that sidewalk there is definitely going to be something to think about. I think that's got all of my parts, so thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Henry, questions or comments for the applicant?
Thank you for bringing us a very well thought out project. I like the massing of it. I would be a hypocrite if I said it was too tall, since I designed 615, AKA the Moore building. So, and thank you for a little bit of taking us on that MRI through the street section, because that does really help tell the story of how B Street is changing, and changing by changing out it becoming a gateway street. So, and you took me back a little bit to the RUDAT sessions that we went through, and glad to see this is developing in the way that it was structured back then too as well. My question for you, Mitch, is the neighborhood meeting that you've had so far. I don't know if you've had one or two. I know when we were going through the process, and typical process is you go to the meetings, you listen to comments. Could you summarize any of those comments that were made at the meetings, and if this current design reflects any of those changes, or are you planning on making future changes based on neighborhood comments?
Well, I think they're similar to what we are hearing today. I mean, there's just this general feeling that the building, you know, is possibly too big. So then that leads to a discussion from a development point of view of, you know, the economics of the project and how it works for us. So, you know, I think we'd be kidding everybody if we said that that's not part of the conversation, because it is. So once we get past that, then it's, you know, how do we soften the street? How do we make it an approachable building? I think people want to know that you know, you're not going to have, I think we were hearing that too big, too intimidating. Well, then, you know, I think what designers do is they look for those opportunities to use different materials and to light buildings a certain way, and to, you know, use window systems that people feel comfortable with and they want to be around. And so it's just, you know, telling our story a little bit differently. The Paseo, you know, it's a transitional space going from, you know, east to west. People will be gathering there, but we want it to be safe, and yet, you know, it could very well be a public space, especially if we space plan these in a way that, you know, maybe we actually bring in another tenant that might be at the back of that. So, you know, we need to be mindful of how that works and so forth. You know, I think the comment, they were just, yes, we've evolved the building materials. I mentioned the color. I think that's going to be an important stroke that we're going to have to figure out. You know, I think a lot of it was just, it's a big building. And so how do we play the game of, you know, additive and deductive forms, you know, as far as the corners, the in and out. You know, it probably would have helped possibly to show the project that Tom did back in the mid, you know, like 05, 06. The difference was that was a complete office building. And as you know, office building and office space is a lot more forgiving than residential development, where you actually have, you know, living units that you start getting them too small, and then the whole thing starts to fall apart. So We've been looking at, or did look at, roof forms and felt that the flat roof at this height, we don't have people looking down on us other than maybe the parking garage. So that was, I think a good thing that we keep using. But I think our goal is to just make this a nicely crafted building that people want to look at, even in a modern rendition. And the research that we do in communities, one that comes to mind for me is Savannah, Georgia. I was there last year, and that town is all about historical architecture, and yet where they probably are spending the majority of their time are these transitional edges that are modern buildings, and that's driven by businesses wanting to get into these historical areas. And so what did they do? Well, they focus on these features that I'm talking about, these things that are about, making the human experience of walking by buildings, memorable. And so that was a takeaway. I also practiced in Santa Barbara for years, and I understand that downtown district and how they brought more modern, buildings there. And it's, a lot of the same things I'm talking about. So I think what we don't want to do, and what was mentioned in those 4 items, and we can go back to those 4 talking points, is to not be authentic about something that's historical. And I think that is a big, historical architecture, like we're talking about, has its own price points and its own way of, there's nothing worse than a knockoff. And so that did not interest us as a development team and designers. And that's not a slight on the historical district at all. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, at length, thoroughly.
You'll learn.
I'm glad you mentioned the colors. It's my biggest nit with the project that dark brown and navy blue. Having 3 older sisters, they would have never let me get out of the house wearing those 2 colors together. So I'm not sure they work on the building either. I'd like to see some happier colors, more vibrant colors, maybe, take a look at the neighborhood and help it become a little bit more vibrant. And I'm glad to hear that you're gonna go away from the standard hardy colors and get something more vibrant. I'd like to see that the next go around. My other comment that you might find some use in is the south elevation. And I was going to suggest something crazy and have you mirror the building and have the paseo and the balconies interact with the neighbors. And like I said, it was crazy for a second, but I was thinking of the depth of the paseo is so wide, it's 10, 12 feet wide, and that would give a bigger setback to the apartments. But I think a better solution is kind of where Adam was going, and maybe that wall becomes a little bit of a living wall, or you come up with something that is a little more palatable for those existing apartments to look at. And a nicer color will help, but having some sort of visual break in it, whether it's a vertical finned element or a living wall, you're the architect. You guys figure out what would be appealing from the neighbors, from those neighbors in particular, to look at. And I actually like all the balconies and the lighting going to the north. North light's awesome, and you've got less heating, cooling gains to deal with. So your approach is pretty spot on, and I'm looking forward to seeing it at preliminary design review. Good luck.
Thank you, Henry. Drew, comments and questions for the applicant?
Sure, I've got a couple of questions first before I get to my comments. So Mitch, so you, on the site plan, you indicated that it's 5 feet from the south side of the building to the property line, it looks like, and then you have that bump in component. Is that about 6 feet there?
You're talking about in the paseo?
No, the south side.
South side.
Yeah, I'll get to the north side in a second.
Yeah,
that right there, is that about 6 feet, you say?
It's about 6.
So then, because you said that the building, the adjacent multifamily one that's 3 stories to the south is about 4 feet from the property line, so you're creating about 10 feet in that area, right, to try to get over some fire rating stuff, I would imagine.
Right.
Okay. So that's about 10 feet. And then the width of the paseo, I couldn't find that anywhere. How wide is the paseo?
It's 10, well, it's 15. Yeah. The thing about the paseo that you can sort of see dashed in is the balconies that overhang into the paseo on the second.
And then that's your 10 feet.
Right, so
Okay.
you're gonna have, yeah. So you
the
start to get a
paseo's
sense of
about 15,
closure
and then
above you with, with the way those were.
Cool.
So it's not just a sheer wall.
Right, yeah, sure. Okay, so then how wide is the corridor on the second through the fifth floors?
Probably 5 feet, yeah.
5 or 6?
Yeah.
Okay, something like that. Okay, cool. There's a reason I ask, so I'll get to that. So thanks for a good package again. I think I'm gonna agree with the color thing too. But for me, I think it's more materiality that I'm having an issue with, specifically in the design guidelines. It talks about utilizing historic materials or that found in the district, right? That's not to say that I would want you to mimic a building, because I think that's completely against the Secretary of the Interior's historic preservation standards to mimic historic architecture, right, against a historic building. So the split face block is also the structure of the stair tower and the elevator tower, correct? I would assume.
Well, it could be. I mean, we're looking at a modular system potentially, so we're gonna have the whole podium construction question. So yeah, it could be structural block.
It could be structural block, or it could be poured concrete as part of the
It could be
podium
poured in
system.
concrete, it could be steel frame, and then the block is a veneered material.
Yeah, it could be a lot of different things. Okay. Yeah, I think for me, the split face block, I mean, I like split face block a lot. I've used it on a number of projects. I don't know if it's the right intervention here, materiality wise. And funny enough, I would actually be totally okay with like panelized formed steel or concrete. I mean, like if you want to go modern, like go modern, right? Just go big or go home, right? Or board for concrete would be really kind of unique, or I don't know, there's a lot of different things that you could do. I think the split face block is, I don't know, maybe texturally it's not the right thing. I think from a
Actually, there's if you've seen we use it on Storage Pro over here, where we grind smooth the split face block. I don't know if you've seen that or not. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I have. It does look.
So you bring forth the aggregate and the cement, and you don't have that sort of rough texture, but it's a beautiful material.
Yeah, I've used some shot blast CMU in the past as well. It's similar to that where you're grinding it. Yeah, it's really cool. So I do take issue with the height a little bit. So I have a question. Is it an economic factor that's driving the fifth story in terms of the stories 2 through 5 and the amount of units that you would need to get on site for density in terms of kind of a payback for the, I mean, it's an honest question. You don't have to answer me if you don't want to, but is it?
Well, I can let Tom and Peter speak to this too, but yes, I mean, yes, it is. And let's be honest about it, there's another big component, and that's the city's encouragement to do taller buildings right now in the downtown.
Yeah, no, and
so, I mean, it's we're not willy-nilly about this. I mean, we understand these transitional kind of sites, and so we're sort of meeting a housing demand kind of question, but yeah, the economics for sure.
Yeah, and so I think what's unique about this site compared to some other sites that we've seen actually in different projects is because it does have that backdrop of the parking garage, which is large and in charge in many ways, but is also shorter than this building. And then you have the historic apartment building next door to it, which is now being dwarfed in many ways by this building, right? So for me, that interplay between this 5-story kind of 57-foot tall building adjacent to what's probably about a 30-ish foot building, and then also the probably 40-ish, 35 to 40 foot parking structure, Taller? Okay. I think that interplay is what's kind of making me scratch my head. 5 stories would be okay, I think, maybe. But I think it's because of that historic building adjacent to it. I buy into the whole discussion of the street scale, and I'm in total agreement with this idea that you put the building straight up against the sidewalk. I think that is the scale that's established on B Street from 7th Street kind of to where it does this business with Healdsburg and where the Brew restaurant is. I mean, that's definitely the scale that's being created there. So it's not that I have an issue with that, it's the total overall height, specifically related to that 5th story. I think 4 would be okay because it's kind of a in-betweenish scale thing, and it's specific, and the reason I bring it up is in the Historic Properties and Districts section of the design guidelines, 4.7, let me find it, 4.7 G1, I believe. It talks about new construction, and it says, design new construction to be compatible in height and proportion with adjacent structures. And I think if we weren't in a historic district, I'd say, hey, go 5 stories, go big or go home, right? But because of the connection to the historic properties, that's where I have a hang up with the total overall height, that it's not a transitional kind of thing. It's just, hey, here's 5 stories. But if it were 4, it's closer to the garage and the adjacent building. So then regarding my questions about kind of the distances from the property lines and whatnot, I'm curious if and your units on the upper floors are tight, I can see, but I'm wondering if there's space to kind of adjust that corridor, maybe a foot or 2, and I'm wondering if utilizing, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, utilizing instant hot water heaters and different different arrangements instead of interaction. And then that then intertwines with the 4 elevations of the building, because I think the southern side of the building, I actually really like the northern side of the modular. I mean, this is built for modular in many ways because you have a very repetitive rhythm. And the south side is just starved for that architectural attention, whereas the other 3 sides of the building are not. They're intriguing, they're interesting, there's pushes and pulls, there's voids, there's glazing, and particularly, on the south side, there's a very kind of service capacity of what's going on with the L shape of your podium and then your stair tower, which makes total sense why you would do that. And then the upper floors obviously have that same push-pull glazing thing going on as the other 2 sides. So the south side, to me, needs some love in many ways. And that's why I'm wondering if you can steal a little bit of space and maybe find a way to activate that ground floor and then create that corridor to have a little something, if that makes sense. Let's see what else I had. There was one other thing in the design guidelines that I wanted to read to you. So section 2, core area, historic districts within the downtown and station area plan. So again, this is my height thing. Design buildings to be sensitive to the neighborhood with regard to scale, architectural style, use or materials, bulk, and historic context. This is especially important in designated historic districts. So again, that's kind of what I'm talking about, that 5-story height bit. And you're already kind of at the minimum for your plate heights at 12, 10, 10, 10, 10. I mean, if you took it down to 9, you're gonna feel like you're in a cave in those units above. So that's why I was asking, what could you do on the upper floor? Is it take out half of the upper floor?
Well, we looked at,
I don't know.
To what you're speaking about, for the 4th and 5th floor, I mean, we dropped units is what we ended up doing. So we moved that in. It creates, and we didn't bring these drawings obviously, but it starts to create, excuse me, some roof forms that, if they're flat, then what are they used for? Is it just more out, just like a roof terrace kind of idea, which is, we're doing more of those. But I think what we all finally, when we went full circle on the stepping back idea, is like, well, is that really going to change the ground plane? And it's not.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, it's not. But
so then that led to, well, let's open up the camera angle here and let's really understand what the street's telling us. And the street's telling us, if you look at that width from those face of those Victorians in a really deep front yard, it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, to me, it doesn't feel inappropriate, that's for sure, Mm-hmm. Now, if those were up against the street, then maybe this discussion obviously could possibly change. And we're being confronted and have to address, again, back to the multiple planning documents with a downtown plan and we're in that district. I mean, we're in the stationary plan. Yeah. So, I mean, it gets kind of interesting trying to serve all these masters. And we're not trying to be, we're certainly not disrespectful to any of these documents. I mean, we take them pretty damn serious. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, economics,
I think it's just
constructability.
Yeah.
I mean, we all, the builders and architects in the room, understand, how that works or doesn't.
Yeah. And then my last comment is, so funny enough, that Hardy reveal system, it's actually pretty pricey.
Pretty what?
It's pretty pricey. So I proposed it on a school project a couple of years ago, and we actually value engineered out of it to a similar Hardy product, but without the aluminum reveals all over the place. Mm-hmm. And it still looked just as good without the aluminum reveals. So I think there's some other options in the Hardy line, or Nichiha, or some of these other guys you might want to look at, just architect to architect, that may not be as expensive as that reveal system. It's particularly with the paint situation, because I ran up against that as well. It's a little limited. You would think they have more flair, but they don't.
Yeah.
So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Drew. Eric.
Thank you for the presentation. I agree with you. This lot makes it tough. The location, the surrounding areas, the garage, especially B Street. I'm curious, because I know this is just concept design, but when it comes to the Paseo and the east side of the building, where the sidewalk is that runs parallel to the parking garage, lighting, what are you looking at in regards to lighting that area?
We haven't gotten into that yet. I mean, we spend a lot of time on this topic when we get around to it. I think there'll be lighting. We certainly understand the night light kind of concerns that development has. So the idea is to make lighting work at the ground plane, and yet at the same time, light the forms of the building in a way that will be interesting.
Yeah. So my lighting question comes from a safety standpoint.
Right.
Especially with a 5-story building and that back alley. That garage does not emit much light, right. And you're expecting residents for 24 apartments coming to and from that parking garage primarily into the back lobby area. So lighting actually becomes really important for a safety perspective. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why I'm asking, at the same time, not negatively impacting the neighbors that you have there, right. Especially to the north, where the Paseo is.
Well, the next round of graphics, we really dial in what you're talking about. So you will see nighttime shots of all the elevations in detail. So I didn't bring them, but we just finished a hotel down in Katati for Hard Rock, and there was a whole evening kind of presentation doing exactly what you're talking about.
If I may just interject for a second, as the owner-operator.
Tom, could you use the microphone so that they could hear you? Thanks.
As the owner-operator, my background is in real estate and have been for 20, 30 years, and I'm very concerned of the same things that you're concerned about for the very same reasons. And so while we haven't looked at it in great detail, you have my assurance that it's going to be, you know, priority one for us on the back there for all the same reasons. I mean, you know, if we don't have a safe building or a safe locale, then we have a problem, and it's going to affect everybody. So we're well aware of it.
Okay, appreciate it. Another question is, so with the paseo and the trash, the location for the trash, how is that trash getting out to the street to get collected?
You roll it out, don't you, right now?
Yeah, right now we do.
But those are individual cans, but when you get to multifamily apartment building, 24 apartments, now you're looking at 1 to 2 yard trash dumpsters. How do you get it through the paseo, around the furniture, out onto the street where you can't get it onto the street because there's no street parking on B Street? If you're using individual cans, then you're blocking the entire sidewalk, especially if it's enough cans for 24 apartments. How do you get around those logistics? That's one of my concerns with going back to, I think this lot location becomes very challenging the way B Street is set up nowadays, where it's a two-way street rather than a one-way street.
Yeah.
Excuse me. These are all great questions, by the way. I really like the way you're thinking. This is the kind of things that I think about and sleep, you know, lose sleep over. The short answer is we haven't finalized how we're going to deal with trash. The thoughts occurred to us that we might put in some trash compactor components, mechanical compactors in there, and thereby create a, you know, through compaction, then create smaller trash, you know, trash loads and take them out. It's hard for me to imagine that each unit is going to have an individual trash thing. But it's our intention that, you know, we're going to deal with that. If that means we have janitors that are going to have to roll out cans in order to get to the street so that they can be picked up once, or maybe if I have to, you know, contract to have it done a second time during the week in order to accommodate trash and recycling flow, then those are what I consider operational types of issues that we'll have to rectify. You know, that's how I anticipate we're going to deal with it. But do I have the perfect answer for you now? No.
Yeah, and I appreciate the candidness, and that's my concern with bringing the building all the way out to the sidewalk. There's no area for parking for package delivery, especially with 24 multiple units. You're going to have that. There's very limited access for public safety. There's very limited access for people that are going to be moving in with all their furniture. Limited access to get trash in and out. Even if it's compacted, it becomes very dense and very heavy. Getting that out to the street, and my concern is, especially when you're looking at a pavement system there in the paseo, how loud that gets for the neighbors, having those things rolling back and forth. Concerned about the lighting and safety there for the parking garage. So going back to architectural structure design, there's an issue. I have a concern with the building going all the way out to the sidewalk and not providing for the services for the tenants, and occupants, as well as the impact that it has on the neighbors. So those are my questions and comments.
Thanks, Eric. And before the meeting, we decided we'd do the whole design review board, then flip over to the cultural heritage board and let Mark go last. So don't think I'm hogging the microphone and neglecting my cultural heritage board members here. So I think to, you know, summarize, I could echo almost everything that was said here except for the building height comment. I think we're in a transition and we're going to have these difficult questions come up time and time again as we move into a taller city. So I think that the way in which you've opened it up for this project, for me, is enough for this project, right? Because I understand that there's economics of, you know, density, and you got to pay for the building materials. And the building materials that you're currently showing are not inexpensive. Steel windows is a great look. I think it's going to look fantastic in this area, and money well spent. The reveals that you've done with the balconies are excellent, especially finishing the roof underneath them so that you get a full dimensional design work is a great feature. I think it's going to do a lot for the project. I agree. I was back and forth on the split face block. It's going to be tough structurally, I think, to get it that high. So you may lose too much space with the steel, form and that as a cladding. So that's something to look at. Eric touched on one of the main questions I had, and it kind of feels like maybe it hasn't been fully developed, or maybe it's been further developed already, so you can answer that if it has, is the kind of resident lobby area versus the space eaten up by the office tenants. It kind of seems like that whole restroom core could move south up to the wall, and you could leave more room for some sort of trash solution, maybe a larger elevator, depending on how that impacts the upper floors. Had the same kind of concerns about move in, move out, package delivery, trash collection, bicycle storage. And so I was kind of hoping those are placeholders for now that
they are
might get moved around. Yeah, so perfect. You'll address those as these questions keep Tom up at night. So overall, I'm supportive of the project. I think we do need the housing, and again, I'm supportive of taller buildings because they're just the reality of where we want to head as a city. We've made that pretty clear. I do understand the transition and impact to neighboring properties, but those properties have the same zoning collectively as this property, so they can certainly go higher. And so I think maybe as you go through your street views again multiple times over, you kind of imagine what the property to the north is going to be one day, right? It might be a 5-story building itself. So just keeping those things in mind as you further the design as well. So those are my comments. Okay, Cultural Heritage Board. We'll start with Laura. Laura.
Well, we've listened to all of these wonderful comments from the Design Review Board, but our mandate is different, and our mandate is to protect these neighborhoods and to protect the historic things. So I'm not as concerned with cladding and things like that. I'm concerned with the spacing and the spanning of this building. It's ginormous, and it's not a good neighbor building. It's not a building that I would say I would want to be beside, if I owned a property next door. I think that you're not only, in the front of B Street, you're not only at the edge of the sidewalk, but you're over the sidewalk from the second story up, and you're taking up just a tremendous amount of space on that building. And it's, to me, what Drew mentioned earlier about how the impacts on a historic district and, fitting in, you don't need to be mimic a building, but I would like to see it be more of a good neighbor building. I think five stories is really, really too much. I mean, when you look at the pictures of the impact on the smaller building to the north and the other building to the south, it's ginormous, and it just doesn't work for me as is. I can see where what you have now doesn't work for you either, though. But I think at 5 stories, you're just too tall. That's all I have.
Thank you, Laura. John?
I'm supportive of the project. I'm not concerned about the height of the building,
But what I am concerned about is that it's kind of stark. There's a lot of sharp angles. I'm not sure that I think what you've done here is a good first draft, but what I think you need to do is perhaps take a closer look at the St. Rose district, look at some of the contributors, with some ideas perhaps where you can change the outward design of the building. It just, the way it is now is just, to me, not compatible with the historic nature of the district. I recognize that you're kind of caught between two, things the city wants to do. And so that I just think that somehow, the thing I worry about is that whatever you come up with, in 50 years, that will probably be a contributor to this district. And so what I would like to see is I'd like to see a design that's more compatible with the district, that looks more at, like I say, some ideas that you can gain from design by looking at some of the contributors within the district. If you did that, then I think that it would be a much more easy thing for me to support. I support the idea of building the structure. We desperately need the housing, but I just think a better design would facilitate and perhaps ameliorate some of the issues that some of my fellow board members will come up with or have. So.
Thank you, John. Kurt, questions or comments for the applicant?
Thank you. First of all, I'm kind of looking at this project from many different perspectives. Going back to years ago, I was on the Cultural Heritage Board for a year and a half before I went to the Planning Commission for 6 years. And I have to say, congratulate the city and the Design Review Board and the Cultural Heritage Board for having these sorts of meetings. I don't think we had years ago. I think it's very helpful to probably all parties concerned. Being away from the Cultural Heritage Board and not having absolute knowledge as Secretary of Interior guidelines, FEMA, so on and so, not FEMA, but I'm a bit rusty. Yet at the same time, I appreciate the fact that this particular project has a whole bunch of overlapping controls on it, in essence. And so I come to this looking for a balance, and I think you can achieve it with what you have. The terms that stuck out listening to folks on the design review, as well as I think part of your presentation is transition. This is an area in transition. And as such, I don't know, and the district is too, the St. Rose district in essence. As such, I don't think we want to go to hard and fast guidelines of the past. In other words, I take whoever developed that statement about we don't want to mimic what we once had, perhaps. It is transitional space. We also have a large need for housing. Another term I heard was softening. The kind of way I look at this is you've got a massive structure behind you there in the parking garage. I think this project and others that would front it along, I guess that's B Street there, softens that impact in that area. And I see that as a bonus, as a positive feature for that particular area. Also, I'm intrigued. I think it's a very good use of existing parking spaces if you can get the agreements with the city to provide that parking there, cooperative agreement. That works for me. And I have a background in building parking structures, so I know how the pluses and minuses of that as well. So I encourage you to proceed as you are. I'm sure we'll have some, when it comes back, I'm assuming it comes back either individually to the committees or whatever, we'll have further comments, but I think this is doable, and I would encourage you to proceed.
Thank you, Kurt. Mark.
All right, thank you. Let's start out by, were we able to find out the date of the original building and verify the period of significance?
Right, so the date of the original building, as the applicant stated, was 1969, okay. And the period of significance per the zoning code is 1872 to 1948.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to verify that right off the front. Also wanted one more question of the applicant. They made the statement that they wanted to make a gesture to the historic neighborhoods. And looking at the elevations, I'm asking you kind of straight out, what exactly gesture are you making to the historic architecture of that area? Could you point out on the elevation somewhere where you're looking at something pre-1948?
We're not.
Thank you. With that, I'll go into our purview.
Let me expand on that, and I won't be long. I mean, there's certain principles in architecture about rhythm and openings and all that, and historically, it's, you know, in our profession, you know, longer than any of us have practiced. So those are sort of guiding things that we, you know, default to as we put a building together. So bedroom windows are bedroom windows. It's just, you know, how it comes together. The economics were different when these buildings were done versus what they are now. So, you know, I think there's some basic ideas here that, you know, are universal. It's just, you know, how we choose to finish them off that, you know, that will separate them from, you know, from what's there now.
Okay, thank you. So the mandate of the Cultural Heritage Board is different from the mandate of the Design Review Board. We're not looking at parking or interiors or functional use. Some excellent things were pointed out by our members on the Design Review Board regarding that, and they're very valuable. But that really isn't the purview that we're supposed to be commenting on today. Our purview is how does it fit with the historic district and the guidelines that we've been presented to review it by as far as the historic district goes. The building itself, I think, is a rather nice modern building. I kind of like it. And I'm going against most of the things that I have done in the past when I say what's called the rhythm of this historic district, when viewed on the footprints of the buildings on it, is a residential historic district. And we're looking for new construction to represent the same footprint configuration of the significant elements of that district, which are small single-family bungalows spaced on a lot. That's not what you're presenting today, and for the first time, I'm going to say that your large footprint would be inappropriate in this location because of the other context immediately around you. So in other words, though I've pushed before that people are putting too large of buildings in footprint-wise, I think what you're proposing in this particular location does fit the context reasonably well. Now we're going to get to the bad news. The race is not to be the biggest building in a historic district. And that seems to be kind of where this one is going. We do need to reflect the scale of the historic district. And I'm going to go ahead and talk briefly about what are we going to be evaluating your final presentation by when you come back to us. We have 7 categories that we're going to be reviewing by our guidelines. Height is number 1. Number 2 is proportion. Basically kind of the massing of the structure in comparison to what the other significant buildings are in that district. Rhythm is number 3. Are you picking up on the storylines and window organizations and sizes found elsewhere in the district? Are you picking up on the footprint patterns of the district? 4, setbacks. Are you compatible with the other setbacks in the district, particularly those on adjacent buildings? 5, materials and textures. Are you using materials and textures on the visible elements of the building that have context within that district? We're not looking for you to copy any architectural style, but are you using textures, materials in a way that at least relates to other things that can be found in a district of similar buildings? 6, roof shapes. Typically, we've been saying, well, you've got a bungalow district, which is significant. We're looking for bungalow roof lines. Well, clearly, we're not going to do that on this one. And 7, architectural details and decorative features. Are you looking to the other larger buildings in this district for your exterior treatments? The answer to most of these is no. Proportion. Let's talk about the massing of the building. You've got a little bit higher parking garage in the back, which is out of scale with the district, and you've got one of the bigger buildings in the district right alongside. This current scheme goes significantly higher than either of them, when it would probably be better to be a transition between them, between the garage height and at least the height of the taller building next door. I don't think it's going to be approvable for us to go anything higher than the building next door, if we're trying to be honest to what our guidelines are telling us. Rhythm and footprint, I talked about those already a bit. You have some opportunities to look at the adjacent buildings around you and see if there's a consistent cornice lines, water table lines, storefront treatments for your commercial tenants that can be applied to your building and make it tie in with the district rather than utterly rejecting it. Setbacks. This building is clearly farther out onto the street than anything else on the block. That's a problem for us. You need to recognize and somehow ameliorate your building to the setbacks of the adjacent buildings. Textures and materials. We're not looking for you to copy any style. We're not looking you to do white stucco plaster or anything like that, but some gesture to the other historical buildings of size in that neighborhood. There's a lot of white buildings, for example. Color isn't our purview, but some of the larger buildings have that light colored context that you might look at. And details and decorative features. We're not going to ask you to put Victorian detail on it, but kind of look at the patterns in which the windows and doors and fenestration and stories are handled on the other buildings. To be able to say, at least we tried to make a nod toward what's in the district. As it currently stands, it's a rebuttal to the historic district rather than trying to fit in. And I think that would be a difficulty when we came forward for a major alteration permit on that project. So I'd like to open to my other members for one more round of comments before we finalize our comments. Does anyone else, Laura, do you have any further thoughts?
No, it was the massing and the nod to the historic, that Drew mentioned earlier that was most important to me.
John?
I think this is kind of a tough call for us in the sense that we have some guidelines, but at the same time, I think we have to have some appreciation for the fact that we need the housing, and so in some respects, I'm willing to be a little bit flexible in terms of those guidelines. I would like, you know, as Mark talked to you, suggested, is that you pay some attention to the design of the structure, because it just seems to me to be somewhat out of place. And so my sense is that it would behoove you to take another look at that. That would be my comment.
Kurt.
Really don't have any further comments at this time, other than I have to say, having sat with Mark in a meeting for six and a half years, I always admired, and I mean this in a positive way, he's a strict constructionist, and that starts to push you, you know. I am probably a broad constructionist when it comes to these things, and I think we do have to keep in mind, this is a transitional area. It's something, the housing in particular, that the city wants and needs. And how we put that together is why all you guys are working on it, I suppose, and then have to come back and convince us all. But I would still like to see you keep proceeding with this project.
All right, thank you. Chair, how do you want to proceed with final comments?
I think I'll extend the same courtesy to my board members, especially the ones who went first. So thank you for going first, but if you had any final parting comments for the applicant, it'd be appropriate to make them now. Adam?
Sure, thanks, Scott, and I definitely appreciate all of the cultural heritage viewpoints that were brought up there. Very valid and worthwhile to consider. Yeah, I do only just bring it back to the idea that I started with, the thinking of that transitional neighborhood, that this is actually acting, I see this project as acting as somewhat of a bridge between the new development, the new direction that is being, the new mandates that are happening downtown, with going into the extending into the historic neighborhoods around there. And so, I do think that there can be some more thought in terms of materiality in looking at that, and of course, this is a great package, and I look forward to seeing how you're going to take these comments and see what you come back with. The colors are definitely worth thinking about. As I mentioned before, the softening. There's actually one thing that I did want to mention that hadn't been brought up, but there are two options for the fencing, which it must be a conversation that's ongoing because you have two concepts. And so that is also, I mean, right there is sort of a case in point of the two options that you can go with, the two viewpoints there, sort of with the whole building. You go with this very modern, clean, almost industrial look of the concept B with the perforated woven metal, very kind of stark. And then you have the more referencing the natural forms of the woven bands of metal fencing, somewhat look more natural. They've got a more organic feel to them. I think that, my preference is for that concept A because it does, and I think that you can extend that to the building as a whole of how you can actually bring in the modern feel, but reference what's there. I think you're on the way. Yeah, I think you can, I do look forward to seeing what you have. But really thinking about how you can be sensitive to both of those, mandates that you're straddling. So, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to jump out of sequence real quick because board member Goldschlag needs to leave here shortly.
Comments, but I appreciate that.
Beautiful. All right, Henry.
I'm looking forward to seeing it at the next level. I know you'll bring it up. We'll listen to all the comments here. You guys will do a good job with bringing it up to the next level for approvals. I find it interesting, 526 B Street, it's only a story and a half lower than what you're proposing. So I'd like to see some more visuals when you come back to us, bring us some perspectives from the other side of 526 looking to the northeast, because that in the foreground I think will help people see from a perspective. We play this game all the time, you know, it looks differently from one side to the other. So you're showing us tonight it from the north looking southeast. So that's going to make the building adjacent to it shorter looking in appearance. So I'd like to see it, in fairness, on both sides of the building, and in relationship to the parking garage in the back, because that is a backdrop that springs off a height that I think maybe the Cultural Heritage Board will see that it's a little more palatable. So that's, I think, what I wanted to add to this evening. Good luck. Bring it back to us soon.
Thanks, Henry. Drew?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm actually, you know, I was critical, I think, Mitch, but I'm also really excited. I love infill development, like just in general. I think it can be really interesting and engaging for a city. And yeah, views from like other areas in perspective to really showcase that maybe it's not as big as we think it is, because maybe it isn't. But one thing I did want to kind of point out, maybe it's a question, we were kind of looking at this, so we pulled out the city GIS map, and the St. Rose Neighborhood Association boundary is different than the historic district boundary found in the zoning code. So actually this property is not in the boundary for the neighborhood association, but it is in the boundary of the preservation district, kind of a weird little wrinkle. I think that's an element and indicative of kind of the place that you find yourself, serving two different things. And in many ways, this isn't it's not currently a residential property, which is why it doesn't live in that neighborhood association. But yeah, I'm excited, and I want to push you guys to really create some amazing architecture, because I think you can, and you're capable of that. So I'm really looking forward to this coming back. Thanks.
Yeah, and the final comment I would make, and it was spurred by comments on the Cultural Heritage Board regarding the setback of the front of the building, is that the southwest corner is pretty stark on the architectural elevation, and being that the neighboring property is set back a little bit, and it looks like that first floor is more of like a deck or something that people gather on. It's just softening that side so that it's not a setback per se, but it's softer for those people that are directly adjacent. Might go a long ways to helping them mitigate the fact that it doesn't have a full setback. So that'd be my parting comment. With that, I want to thank you for a lovely presentation, very comprehensive, and again, echoing our board members, fellow board members, I'd like to see you back soon. So thanks. And thanks for the members of the public that spoke earlier, and those of you who are going to be following the project. So next up on our agenda is board member reports. Any DRB board member reports? Check in with your board for any board member reports.
Anybody? I'll just do one. I've been contacted with St. Rose Neighborhood Association's ongoing discussions regarding the Caritas Village project is one. Also, they mostly for the benefit of our other board members, is the historic tax credit is on the governor's desk right now. If we can get him to reapprove the historic tax credits, it will be a great thing for helping to use adaptive reuse and better use the existing building stock in Santa Rosa. So, all right, that's mine.
Good information. Department reports. Seeing no department reports, We are at the end of our meeting, and I will call for adjournment. Thank you.